I'm Vivian Calloway, 50 years old, and I spent 30 years in the United States Air Force, building the quiet agreements that keep nervous countries from going to war. For decades, I showed up for my family, sent the money, flew the miles, and let them believe my work was nothing more than paperwork on a base. But when a young officer waved me toward the table by the kitchen doors at an embassy reception held in honor of my own work, while my sister smirked from the head table, I learned exactly how the truth chooses its own moment to walk into a room. Have you ever been overlooked by the very people who should have been proudest of you? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe. The gown was the wrong choice, and I knew it even as I zipped it. It was a deep navy, simple, elegant, the kind of thing a woman wears when she wants to disappear politely into a room. My mess dress, with the single silver star on the shoulder, was somewhere over the Atlantic, in a suitcase an airline had misplaced for the third time that year. So I stood in a hotel room in a foreign capital, 50 years old, smoothing fabric over my hips, and I made my peace with being underdressed for my own evening. That was the thing nobody in my family ever understood. The evening was mine. The reception downtown, the flags, the toasts, the 3 years of work that two governments were about to congratulate each other for, all of it had my fingerprints on it. I had spent 36 months building a partnership that most people would never hear about and would not understand if they did. And tonight, in a marble ballroom, men in beautiful uniforms were going to raise glasses to a thing I had drawn on a whiteboard in a windowless office at 0500 hours on a Tuesday 2 years before. I checked my reflection one more time. I looked like someone's aunt. I looked like a guest. I did not look like a general, and that night, that small fact was going to cost a young man a great deal of dignity, and it was going to give me back something I had stopped believing I would ever get. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where the measure of a daughter was decided early and rarely revised. My sister Pamela was 4 years older and had been crowned before I could walk. She was the pretty one, the easy one, the one who would marry well. That was the phrase my father, Raymond, used, year after year, as if it were a profession. Pamela's the one who'll marry well. He would say it at dinner, at church, to neighbors over the fence. And then he would look at me, the quiet one with the library books and the model airplanes, and his face would do something complicated, and he would say, we'll see. We'll see. I carried those 2 words for 40 years. I was the child who read field manuals for fun, who took apart the lawnmower engine to understand it, who won the regional science fair in 10th grade with a project on radar and atmospheric interference. My parents did not come to the fair. Pamela had a dance recital the same weekend, and a recital was the kind of thing the family showed up for. I rode the bus home alone with a blue ribbon in my backpack and learned a lesson I would spend decades unlearning, that being good at something is not the same as being seen. When I chose the Air Force, the family treated it like a tantrum. I had a commission, a real one, earned through 4 hard years of officer training while I worked 2 jobs, and my mother cried as if I had announced a prison sentence. At the commissioning ceremony, when I stood in my new blue uniform with my bars freshly pinned, Pamela looked me up and down and said, loud enough for the row behind us to hear, "So you're a secretary, but in a uniform?" People laughed. My father chuckled into his coffee. I held my salute and I did not let my face move, because I had already learned that the only power I had in that family was the power not to flinch. It would be a tidy story if I told you I cut them off, that I walked away and built a life free of them. I did not. I am not built that way. For 30 years, I was the one who came home. When my mother needed a surgery and the insurance fought her, I sent money I could not really spare. When Pamela's first business failed and she needed to borrow against a future she swore was coming, I co-signed. When my father got sick, I flew home on emergency leave between assignments I was not allowed to name, sat by his bed, and held the hand of a man who had spent my whole life telling me to wait and see. None of it counted. That was the part that took me the longest to accept. There is no amount of showing up that converts into respect in a family that has already decided who you are. I sent the money, flew the miles, signed the papers, and at the next holiday, I was still the one who pushed papers on a base. Still the secretary in a uniform. Still the daughter we would apparently see about. By the time I made major, I had stopped explaining. By lieutenant colonel, I had stopped expecting. When I pinned on colonel, I did not even tell them. And when, at 48, in a ceremony in a building most Americans will never enter, I became a brigadier general of the United States Air Force, the only family member I called was nobody, because there was no one in that family who would have understood what the single star meant or believed I had earned it. What did I do exactly? It is hard to say in a sentence, and the difficulty was always part of the problem. I worked in the long, patient, unglamorous space between militaries and governments. I built the architecture that lets two nervous countries trust each other enough to share a radar picture, to coordinate aircraft, to keep a border calm at 3 a.m. when a single misread blip could start something nobody could stop. I was not the pilot in the recruiting poster. I was the person who made it possible for the pilot to fly without starting a war. It is the kind of work that has no highlight reel. It is also the kind of work that, done badly, ends with people dead. I laid the navy gown flat one more time, the way you smooth something you're not sure of. On the dresser sat the single silver star, taken from the lost mess dress's spare set, the one thing of the uniform I had with me. I could not wear it on a civilian gown. I picked it up and felt its small weight in my palm, cool and certain, and I set it back down. It does not matter, I told myself. Who in that room knows what I am? The work is the work whether anyone claps. I had told myself a version of that sentence 10,000 times across 30 years, and most nights I even believed it. I picked up my clutch, slid the hotel key inside, and went downstairs to be honored by strangers and overlooked by my own blood, in that order, before the night was through. The trouble with a lifetime of being underestimated is that you begin to participate in it. You make yourself smaller before anyone asks. You take the seat by the door so no one has to move you. I had become very good at being easy to dismiss, and I want to be honest about that because the young captain who would humiliate me later that evening did not invent the idea that I was nobody. My family had spent 40 years teaching the world to read me that way, and I had spent 40 years being a cooperative student. Renata saw it before I did. Renata Sims and I had been lieutenants together a lifetime ago, two women in rooms full of men who assumed we were lost. She had retired a full colonel, sharp as ever, and she had appointed herself the keeper of the truths I preferred to avoid. 3 days before I flew out, she called me, and I made the mistake of telling her my mess dress had gone missing again. "So wear the star in the civilian dress," she said. "You can't pin a flag officer star on an evening gown, Renata. It doesn't work like that. Then carry it in your hand and put it on the table where God and everybody can see it." I could hear her smiling. "Vivian, you built the thing they are throwing this party for. You. Sit at the front. Let the room look at you for once." I told her she was being dramatic. She told me I was being a coward, in the warm way only a friend of 30 years can call you a coward and have it land as love. "One day," she said, "the truth is going to walk right into a room you are in, and you are not going to be able to stop it. When it does, do me a favor and let it." I did not know how literally she would be proven right. I had a second reason for dreading the evening, and I had not told Renata until that call. Pamela and Gregory were going to be there. Not because of me. They had no idea the reception had anything to do with me. Gregory had spent his career in the orbit of the State Department, the kind of man who collects embassy invitations the way other men collect wine. And through some chain of his connections, he and my sister had wrangled their way onto the guest list of a diplomatic event in a city I happened to be working in. When Pamela had called to tell me, breathless with the glamour of it, she had said, "You'll never guess where Gregory's taking me. An actual embassy reception. Black tie. Very exclusive." She had paused, then added kindly, "The way you toss a coin to someone on a corner." I think there's some military thing being honored. You'd probably find it boring, but it's such a beautiful event. Some military thing being honored. I had sat with the phone against my ear and looked out my office window and decided, in that moment, that I was not going to tell her. I was not going to say, "Pam, that military thing is mine. I am the reason for the evening. I will be at the head table." I didn't say it because I had said versions of it before, across decades, and every time I had reached toward them with the truth of my life, they had found a way to make the reach itself the embarrassing thing. Look at her, needing us to be impressed. So I would simply go. I would let the night be what it was. If they discovered who I was, they discovered it. If they did not, the work was still the work. I told myself this was strength. I know now it was something closer to a flinch. There's a difference between not needing applause and hiding the very existence of your life from the people who should have been proudest of it. I had blurred that line so long I could no longer see it. I had let my family's small estimate of me become a kind of home, cramped and familiar, and I had furnished it and lived in it and called the discomfort peace. The night before the flight, I packed the gown in a Garmin bag and zipped the silver star into the inside pocket of my carry-on, where it sat against my passport like a secret. I thought about Renata's words, "The truth is going to walk into a room." I thought, not tonight. Tonight I will keep it folded in my hand. I have learned since that you do not get to decide when the truth walks in. You only get to decide whether you are standing up or sitting down when it does. I flew through the night, slept badly, landed late, and arrived at the hotel with 2 hours to dress, and no luggage but the bag I had carried on. I should have been thinking about my remarks, about the host nation officers I would greet, about the careful diplomatic choreography of the evening ahead. Instead, I stood at a foreign window in a borrowed kind of calm and thought about a blue ribbon in a backpack and a bus ride home, and how some part of me, even at 50, even with a star to my name, was still that girl, wondering why no one had come to see what she could do. The embassy ballroom was the kind of room built to make people feel the weight of nations. High ceilings, pale marble, tall windows dressed in heavy fabric, and along the far wall, the flags of 2 countries hanging side by side in the still air. Waiters moved through the early crowd with trays of champagne. A string quartet played something restrained. The light was warm and golden, and it caught on medals and cufflinks and the polished shoes of men who had spent their lives learning to stand correctly in rooms like this. I came in off the street, still carrying the faint disorder of travel. The navy gown smoothed, but not crisp, my hair simple, no uniform, no insignia, nothing about me announcing anything at all. I gave my name to the young officer at the protocol table near the entrance, the way you do, quietly, expecting it to be found and checked and waved through. He was an army captain, perhaps 29, with the clean, earnest look of a man new to a posting he badly wanted to do well. His name, I would learn, was Trent Mercer. He had a clipboard and a seating chart and the particular tension of a junior officer who has been told that protocol is everything and that the ambassador notices mistakes. He scanned his list. He looked at me, a middle-aged woman in a civilian dress with no escort and no insignia, and I watched him perform the small, unconscious arithmetic that people had been performing about me my whole life. He did not find a flag officer's marker next to a woman who looked like me because he was not looking for one, and he was looking for staff, and so he found staff. "Aides and staff sit here, ma'am," he said, not unkindly, gesturing toward a long table set against the side wall near the doors that led to the kitchens. "The principals are up front." He gave me the small, practiced smile of a man moving a problem efficiently out of his way, already glancing past me to the next arrival. "I want to tell you I corrected him. I want to tell you I drew myself up and said, 'Captain, I am Brigadier General Calloway, and this evening is in honor of my work, and you will seat me at the head table.' That is what the woman I am today would do, or at least what she would consider. But the woman standing in that doorway was 50 years deep into a habit, and the habit was older and stronger than the star in my hotel safe. So I did what I had always done. I said, 'Of course,' and I walked to the seat by the kitchen doors. It was, I realized as I sat, the worst seat in the room. The service doors swung open behind me every few minutes, releasing a gust of clatter and heat. The other people at the table were genuinely aides and junior staff. Young, nervous, sweet, and I liked them immediately. A press attaché's assistant named Dana, a communications officer barely a year out of training. They did not know who I was either, and I did not tell them. I asked them about their work and their families and the city, and they relaxed into the conversation, glad someone older seemed interested, and for a little while, it was the most pleasant table in the room precisely because no one at it was performing. Across the ballroom, at the head table beneath the 2 flags, I saw my sister. Pamela looked radiant. She had dressed for the diplomatic crowd with the care of a woman who had waited her whole life to belong to it. And she had Gregory beside her in his tailored tuxedo, leaning to murmur to a man with an important-looking sash. She was scanning the room the way she always did, taking inventory of who mattered, and her eyes found me by the kitchen doors. I saw the exact moment she understood where I was sitting. I saw the small flicker of surprise, and then I saw the smirk, It was a private thing, just for her, the smallest curve of the mouth, and it said everything our family had ever said to me. Of course. Of course Vivian is at the staff table by the kitchen. Where else would Vivian be? She did not wave. She did not come over. She turned back to Gregory and said something, and he glanced toward me and gave a thin, diplomatic smile and looked away. And the two of them folded back into the brightness of the head table, as if I were a piece of the furniture they had noticed and dismissed. I felt the old heat climb my neck. Not anger, exactly. Something more tired than anger. The feeling of being proven right about the worst thing you believe about your place in the world. I had flown across an ocean to be honored, and within 10 minutes I had been sorted, by a stranger and by my sister in the same gesture, into the place they had always kept for me. The edge of the room, the seat by the door. I picked up my water glass and I made myself smile at young Dana, who was telling me about her little boy back home. And I thought, the work is still the work. I thought, it does not matter who in this room knows what I am. I had the sentence ready, worn smooth from 30 years of handling. And for the length of a breath, I almost believed it again. Then the double doors at the head of the room opened, and the ambassador walked in. Henry Maddox was a tall man in his 60s, who wore authority the way some men wear a good coat, easily, without seeming to think about it. He had been the chief of mission in that capital for 4 years, and he and I had spent 3 of them building the thing this evening was meant to celebrate. We had argued across conference tables and agreed across them, had stayed up past midnight on secure calls when the partnership nearly collapsed twice, had learned the particular trust that forms between a diplomat and a soldier who are both trying to keep something fragile alive. He knew my work better than anyone in that room. He had, I would later learn, personally asked that I be invited, and personally asked that I be seated beside him. An instruction that had traveled down through 3 layers of staff and arrived, somewhere near the bottom, at a clipboard held by a captain who had never met me. He came in, and the room turned toward him the way rooms do. He smiled, lifted a hand to someone, took a glass from a passing tray. And then he began, in the unhurried way of a man who runs the room, to look for someone. I watched him scan the head table. I watched a small line appear between his brows when he did not find what he was looking for. He said something to an aide, who shook his head and gestured vaguely. Maddox's eyes moved out across the ballroom, table by table, patient and deliberate, and I realized, with a slow, cold drop in my stomach, who he was looking for. I had time to think, no. I had time to think, please, not like this. And then his gaze reached the long table by the kitchen doors, and it found me, and his whole face changed. He set his glass down on the nearest table. He did not hand it to anyone. He just set it down, the way you put down anything that has suddenly become irrelevant, and he started walking, straight toward me, across the entire length of that ballroom, past the head table, past a major general from the host nation, past a deputy minister and a row of colonels and a knot of diplomats who all turned to see where the ambassador of the United States was going in such a direct and undiplomatic line. The room went quiet in pieces. Conversation stopped table by table as people followed his path. The string quartet played on for a moment and then faltered into silence. 200 faces turned to watch Henry Maddox cross his own reception to reach a woman in a navy gown sitting by the kitchen doors, and I sat very still because there was nothing else to do, and I watched him come. He stopped in front of my table. The young aides stared up at him, frozen, and the ambassador of the United States looked down at me with an expression I can only call apology mixed with something close to delight, and he held out his arm. "General Calloway," he said, and his voice carried in the silence, easily, intentionally, to every corner of that room. "You're with me tonight." I heard, somewhere to my left, a glass touch a table too hard. I heard a small sound from young Dana beside me, an intake of breath. But I was looking at Henry's offered arm, and I was thinking, absurdly, of a blue ribbon, of a bus, of 40 years of we'll see, and I found that my hands were steady as I set down my napkin and stood. "Mr. Ambassador," I said. He raised his voice then, not a shout, just the trained projection of a man used to addressing rooms, and he turned so that he spoke to all of them. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive me. I've been looking for the most important person here, and someone hid her by the kitchen." A ripple of uncertain laughter. "May I present Brigadier General Vivian Calloway, United States Air Force, the officer who built the partnership we are here to celebrate. Every agreement we signed tonight, she drew first." I took his arm. and as he turned me toward the head table, I let my eyes pass once, only once, across the room, and I saw Captain Trent Mercer standing rigid by the protocol table near the door, his clipboard hanging from his hand, his face drained of every drop of color. He had understood. I watched the understanding hit him in waves, each one paler than the last. The woman he had sent to the kitchen doors was the reason the evening existed, and he had done it in front of the ambassador and 200 guests. And in the small, panicked world behind his eyes, I could see his young career ending. And I saw Pamela. My sister had risen halfway out of her chair at the head table, one hand pressed flat to the white tablecloth, her face open and undone in a way I had never once seen it. The smirk was gone. Everything she had decided about me, the whole architecture of 40 years, was collapsing in real time, and she had nowhere to put her eyes. She looked at me, being escorted past her by the ambassador of the United States, and she did not have a single word, and for the first time in our lives, the silence in the room belonged to me. I did not look back at the kitchen doors. I did not look at my sister a second longer than that glance. I walked beside Henry Maddox to the front of the room, to the seat that had been mine all along, and I sat down at the head table under the flags of 2 countries, and I let the truth Renata had promised me finish walking into the room. The head table was a different country. From the front of the room, you could see the whole reception laid out, and you understood, in a way you never could from the edges, that the room had a center, and that the center had been holding a chair for you. Henry seated me at his right hand. The host nation major general, a courtly man with silver hair, leaned across to tell me in careful English that he had read the framework document I authored and considered it a model. A deputy minister raised his glass to me from down the table. The evening reorganized itself around a fact it had briefly misplaced, and the fact was me. I should have felt triumphant. Mostly I felt strange and a little unmoored, the way you do when a thing you stopped allowing yourself to want arrives anyway and you do not have the muscles to hold it. Colonel André Lemoyne reached me within 2 minutes. He was the defense attaché, a compact, intense man who wore his army colonel's insignia and his responsibility with equal seriousness, and Captain Mercer worked for him. He crouched beside my chair so we could speak without the whole table hearing, and his face was tight with a fury that I understood was aimed entirely at himself and his own house. "General, I owe you an apology that I don't have words for," he said quietly. "That was my aid. That was my failure. The instruction to seat you beside the ambassador came through my office, and it did not reach him correctly, and that is on me, not you. I will deal with Captain Mercer tonight. I'll have him relieved of these duties by morning, and there will be a formal letter. I promise you, this will follow him." There it was. The machinery of consequence already turning, ready to grind a 29-year-old man into powder on my behalf. A formal letter of reprimand in the file of a junior officer is not a slap on the wrist. It is a quiet sentence. It ends promotion boards. It ends careers. With 3 words to Colonel Lemoyne, I could have ended Trent Mercer's path in the army, and the strange thing, the thing I sat with as Lemoyne waited for my answer, was that no part of me wanted to. I looked out across the room and found Mercer again. He had not moved from the protocol table. He was standing at a rigid, miserable kind of attention, staring at the middle distance, a young man waiting to be destroyed and trying to take it like a soldier. And I knew that posture. I knew it from the inside. I had stood exactly that way at my own commissioning while my sister called me a secretary, and the row behind us laughed. I knew what it was to be sorted to the edge of a room and then to stand very straight so no one could see it land. "Hold, Colonel," I said. Lemoyne blinked. "Ma'am?" "Hold," I said again gently. "Don't relieve him tonight. Don't write the letter yet. I'd like to speak with him myself before anyone decides what tonight cost him. General, with respect, he humiliated you in front of the entire mission. He made a protocol error under pressure because the people above him, including me, gave him a woman in a borrowed gown and no insignia and expected him to know," I said. "I've spent my whole life being read the way he read me. I am not going to spend the one night the reading was corrected, handing out the same sentence I've been serving." I held his eyes. "Hold, that's not a request I'm dressing up as one." He held my gaze a moment longer, then something in his face eased, and he nodded once, the nod of a good officer recognizing an order he did not expect but could respect. "Yes, ma'am," he said, And he rose and went to stand near his captain, and I saw him say something low that made the young man's shoulders drop a fraction from their rigid line. The toasts began. Henry rose and spoke about the partnership, about 3 years of patient work, about trust built one difficult conversation at a time, and he named me twice more, easily, as though my name had always belonged in that speech. The host nation's representative spoke. Glasses were raised, and somewhere in the middle of it, between the speeches and the careful applause, I felt the night turn from an ambush into something I had not had in a very long time, which was the simple experience of being in the right place under my own name. I let myself find Pamela once more. She was seated again, very upright, her wine untouched, watching the toasts with the expression of a person doing math she does not like. Gregory beside her had gone quiet and attentive, the diplomat in him recalculating the value of a sister-in-law he had filed under nothing. I felt no urge to gloat. I felt, if anything, a kind of distant sorrow, because I could see Pamela arriving, at 54, at a truth about her own sister that she could have had for free at any point in 40 years if she had ever once asked me a real question about my life. Renata's voice came back to me from 3 days and a whole lifetime before. The truth is going to walk into a room and you won't be able to stop it. Let it. I had not been able to stop it. Henry Maddox had carried it across 200 feet of marble, whether I was ready or not. And sitting at the head table with my hands finally still, I understood that the only thing left to decide was what kind of woman I was going to be now that the room could finally see me. The kind who used the moment as a weapon, or the kind who used it as a door. I set down my glass. I was going to talk to the captain, and then I was going to talk to my sister. In that order, because the stranger was the easier conversation and I needed the practice. I found Trent Mercer during the lull after the toasts, when the formal program loosened into mingling, and the band started again and people drifted toward the bars at the edges of the room. He was still near the protocol table, doing his job with mechanical precision, checking late arrivals against his list, but the life had gone out of his motions. When he saw me approaching, the color that had partly returned to his face drained out of it again, and he came to attention so fast he nearly knocked his clipboard off the table. "General Calloway, ma'am." His voice was steady only because he was forcing it. "Ma'am, I owe you the most complete apology I am capable of giving. What I did was inexcusable. I sent you to. I don't have any defense. Colonel Lemoyne has told me to expect to be relieved, and I want you to know I understand, and I won't contest it. I'm sorry, ma'am. I am deeply sorry." He had rehearsed it. I could hear that he had rehearsed it in the few minutes he had, the way you rehearse the thing you most dread saying so your voice does not break in the middle. It made me like him, which I had not expected. "At ease, Captain," I said. "Look at me, not through me." He brought his eyes to mine with visible effort. "How long have you been at this post?" 6 weeks, ma'am." "And how many flag officers have you personally met in those 6 weeks?" He hesitated. "Including tonight, ma'am. 1. So when a woman in a civilian gown, no insignia, no escort, came off the street and gave you a name that wasn't flagged on your chart, you sorted her the way your training and your eyes told you to sort her." I watched him. "You saw staff because you were looking for staff and because nothing about how I arrived told you otherwise. Is that a fair description of what happened?" Yes, ma'am, but that's an explanation, and I don't think I'm owed one." "You're not owed one," I agreed. "But you're owed the truth, and the truth is more complicated than you're a fool who insulted a general." The instruction to seat me beside the ambassador left Colonel Lemoyne's office and got lost on the way to your clipboard. "You executed the information you had. The information was wrong, and some of that is mine, because I am the one who showed up looking like anything but what I am. I let that sit. I have spent 30 years, Captain, being looked at and sorted to the edge of the room. By strangers. By my own family tonight, 20 feet from where you stood. I know exactly what it is to be read wrong by people glancing at the surface. I am not going to end your career for doing the thing the entire world does to people it isn't paying close enough attention to." He stared at me. "Ma'am, I don't. You're not going to ask the colonel to relieve me?" "I've already told the colonel to hold," I said. "There will be no letter. You'll keep these duties, and you will be very, very good at them because you are going to remember this night every time you look at a guest list for the rest of your career." I stepped a little closer, and I lowered my voice so it was only for him. You sat me with the AIDS, Captain. So did most of my life. Here's the only thing I want you to take from it. Don't make my family's mistake. Don't ever again decide who matters in a room by where they're standing or what they're wearing when they walk in. The most important person in any room is very often the one you've sorted to the door. Learn to see them before someone has to cross the floor to show you. Something happened in his face then that I have seen only a few times in my career. The moment a young officer stops bracing for punishment and starts absorbing a lesson. The moment the fear converts into something that will actually change him. His eyes were wet, and he was furious at himself for it, and he held the attention anyway. Yes, ma'am, he said. I will not forget it. I promise you, I will not. I know, I said. That's why I'm spending it on you instead of breaking you with it. I stepped back. Now fix your face, Captain. You're still on duty and there are guests at the door. He almost laughed a small broken sound of relief, and he straightened his clipboard and wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand and turned back to his post, a different man than he had been 3 minutes before. I left him there. Behind me, I heard him greet the next arrival with a warmth that had not been in his voice all night, and I thought, good. That one will be worth something now. That was the easy conversation. My sister was crossing the room toward me, and the look on her face told me the hard one had arrived. Pamela reached me near the tall windows, away from the center of the room, in a pocket of relative quiet where the band was muffled and the crowd thinned. For a moment, we just stood there. 2 women in their 50s who had known each other their entire lives and apparently not at all. And I watched her search for the register to use because all the old ones had just stopped working. I didn't know, she said finally. Viv, I swear, I had no idea it was. That any of this was about you. Gregory said it was some defense thing. I didn't know it was I didn't know you were. A general, I said. The word you're looking for is general. How long? She asked, and her voice cracked on it. How long have you been a general? 2 years. 2 years. She pressed her hand to her mouth. You've been a general for 2 years, and you never said anything. Why would you not say anything? And there it was, the question that contained the whole of us, asked by my sister with what I think was genuine bewilderment, as if the silence had been a strange choice of mine, rather than the only shape the relationship had ever allowed. Because the last time I tried to tell you something about my life, I said evenly, without heat, because I had no heat left for this, you told me I pushed papers on a base. The time before that, I was a secretary in a uniform. When Dad was dying and I flew home from a posting I wasn't allowed to name, you told me I was making it about myself. Every single time across 30 years that I reached towards you with the truth of what I do, Pam, you found a way to make the reaching the embarrassing part. So at some point I stopped reaching. It wasn't a secret. It was just easier than being told, one more time, that the thing I'd given my life to was nothing. She had started to cry, quietly, the way a person cries when the story they have always told about themselves is coming apart in their hands. I didn't know it was. I thought you. We always thought you did something small, something administrative. You let us think that. I didn't let you think anything, I said. You decided it when I was 16 and you never once revised it. That's not the same as me hiding. You had 40 years to ask me a real question. You never asked one. Tonight, an ambassador crossed an entire ballroom to ask the question you couldn't be bothered to ask across a Thanksgiving table. I said it without cruelty. It was just finally true and laid out in the open between us where neither of us could pretend it away. I'm sorry, she said. Viv, I am so sorry. I believed her. That was the thing that surprised me. I looked at my sister's wet, undone face, and I believed that she was sorry. And I also knew that sorry, by itself, was not going to be enough, and that I did not have to pretend it was just because she had finally felt the weight of it. I know you are, I said. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's fine because it isn't, and we'd both know I was lying. 40 years doesn't dissolve because an ambassador embarrassed you into seeing me. But I'll tell you what I am going to do. I took a breath, and I felt the shape of the boundary as I said it, clean and firm. I'm done being the family's footnote, Pam. I'm done being the one you mention last and explain away. If you want a sister, you can have one, but you'll have an equal, or you'll have no one. I'm not auditioning for your respect anymore. Not yours, not Gregory's, not the memory of Dad's. That part of my life is closed. She nodded, fast, swallowing. Okay. I understand. That's fair. Yes. Good. I softened a little because she was still my sister and the fight had gone out of me years ago. Go back to your table. Enjoy your beautiful evening. We can talk tomorrow when there isn't a room watching us. She reached out and squeezed my hand, hard, the first wholly honest thing she had done to me in I could not remember how long. And she went back toward the head table where Gregory was waiting, and I stood by the window and breathed and let the strangest evening of my adult life keep unfolding around me. I did not feel victorious. I have to keep saying that because the movies would tell you I should have. I felt instead a vast and quiet relief. The relief of finally setting down a weight you have carried so long you forgot it was optional. I had not destroyed anyone. I had not made a speech. I had simply, at 50 years old, stopped agreeing to be small. And that, it turned out, was the only revenge I had ever actually wanted. The work my family called paperwork had once held a border quiet for 72 hours while two governments decided not to go to war. I have never been able to tell that story at a dinner table, because most of it I am not allowed to tell at all, and the parts I can tell do not fit between the salad and the entree. But I want to tell you a piece of it now, because you should understand what was actually sitting at that kitchen door table while my sister smirked. 2 years before that reception, in the cold, gray hours of a winter morning, an aircraft strayed across a border it should not have crossed. It was almost certainly an accident, a navigation error, a frightened young pilot off course in bad weather. But the two countries on either side of that line did not trust each other. And a single misread radar contact in a place like that can become a shooting in a matter of minutes, and a shooting can become a war by lunchtime. I have watched it nearly happen. I have sat in a windowless room at 3 a.m. with a headset on and a secure line open to people who were one wrong word away from giving an order no one could take back. What kept the peace that morning was not a hero in a cockpit. It was a framework. It was a set of agreements and protocols and shared procedures that I had spent years building, a structure that let the two sides pick up a phone instead of a weapon, that gave them a shared picture of the same sky so that the contact everyone was afraid of could be identified, talked down, and turned around before anyone fired. We held that border calm for 3 days, through nothing but the patient architecture of trust, and almost no one will ever know it happened because the great triumphs of my kind of work look exactly like nothing happening at all. That was the thing in the navy gown by the kitchen doors. Not a secretary, not a paper pusher, a person who had, more than once, stood between two frightened nations and given them a way not to kill each other. You can see why the seat assignment struck me as funny, in a bleak sort of way, even as it stung. In the days after the reception, the consequences of that night settled into their final shapes, and they were not the shapes I would have predicted. Trent Mercer, who I had every right to break, became the best protocol officer that mission had. Lemoyne told me about it weeks later, half amazed. The young captain had taken the night and turned it into a standard. He triple-checked every list. He learned the face of every visiting official before they arrived. And, Lemoyne said, he had started doing something unusual. When a guest came in looking uncertain or out of place, underdressed, unescorted, easy to overlook, Mercer made a point of greeting them with extra warmth and finding out who they were before he assumed. He had become, in Lemoyne's words, the officer who refuses to sort people by the door. I had spent the mercy well. And Pamela. Pamela cracked open, slowly, in the way that people sometimes do when a story they have organized their whole identity around finally fails. I learned later that she had sat at that head table after our conversation and listened to the host nation officers around her talk about my work, about what the partnership meant to their country's safety, about the American general who had made it possible, and that she had had to sit there and absorb every word with her own wineglass untouched in front of her. Gregory, who had filed me under nothing for 2 decades, suddenly could not stop mentioning his sister-in-law, the general. The social capital of my family quietly reorganized itself around the very person it had spent 40 years discounting. And Pamela felt the ground move under the careful life she had built on the premise that she was the one who had chosen the bigger world. I did not gloat over any of it. I want to be clear about that, because the temptation was there, and I am not a saint. But I had learned something across that long evening that I was still learning in the weeks after, which is that the deepest satisfaction is not watching the people who dismissed you suffer. It is discovering that you no longer need them to do anything at all. Pamela's reckoning was hers to have. It was not a gift she owed me, and it was not a meal I needed to eat. I had my star, my work, my quiet, and the border that had stayed calm because of a framework I drew on a whiteboard at dawn. That was enough. It had, I was beginning to understand, always been enough. I had just never let myself sit at the front of the room long enough to feel it. We did talk the next day, Pamela and I, in a small garden behind the hotel where the city's noise softened to a hum and the morning was cool and ordinary after the gold and marble of the night before. There were no ambassadors there, no flags, no quartet, no 200 faces. Just two sisters on a stone bench, which is a much harder room to be honest in than a ballroom. Because in a ballroom you can hide behind the occasion, and in a garden there's nothing to hide behind but the truth. She had clearly not slept. She started talking before she had even fully sat down, the words tumbling out of her in the disordered way of someone who has been rehearsing an apology all night and lost the script. "I kept trying to figure out when it started," she said. "When I decided you were. Less. And I couldn't find the beginning, Viv, because there wasn't one. It was just always there. You were the smart one, and I was the pretty one, and somewhere I turned that into you being beneath me, and I don't. I genuinely don't know how I did that to my own sister for 40 years. I let her talk. I had learned in my work that the most important thing in a hard conversation is often to let the other person reach the bottom of their own thought without rushing to rescue them from it. I think," she said slowly, and this was the part that cost her. I could see it costing her. "I think I needed you to be small, so that I could feel like I'd chosen the bigger life. Because if you were just my little sister with the dull government job, then marrying Gregory and the embassy parties and all of it meant I'd won something. But if you were this, if you were a general who keeps countries from going to war, then I spent my whole life polishing the outside of a life, and you were off, actually." She stopped. And I couldn't let that be true, so I just never looked. It was the most honest thing my sister had ever said to me. I sat with it. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "I do. And I want to be careful here because I could make this easy for you right now, and I don't think easy is what either of us needs." I turned to face her on the bench. "I'm not going to pretend the last 40 years didn't happen because last night you found out I matter. Respect that only shows up after an ambassador validates me isn't respect, Pam. It's just you updating your social math. If we're going to have something real, it can't be because I impressed your crowd. It has to be because you actually want to know me. The real me, the boring parts, the parts I can't tell you, the parts that aren't glamorous at all." "I do," she said. "I want that. I don't know how, but I want to." "Then we'll figure out how," I said. "Slowly, as equals. You don't get the 40 years back for free, but you can have the next part, if you mean it. That's the only deal I've got, and it's a fair one." She nodded and she cried again, but it was a softer crying, and we sat in the garden a while longer without needing to fill it, and when we parted it was not with a tidy bow and a swelling of music. It was two tired women agreeing to try, which is, I have come to believe, the only kind of repair that actually holds. The dramatic reconciliations make for better thumbnails. The real ones happen on stone benches, with nobody watching and no guarantee at the end. I called Renata that night from my hotel room. "So," she said before I had said anything, because she could hear it in the single syllable of my hello. The truth walked into the room. It crossed the entire room, Renata. The ambassador set down his drink and walked the length of a ballroom to get me out of the kitchen door seat, in front of everyone, in front of Pamela. There was a silence on the line, and then my oldest friend said softly, "I wish I could have seen her face." "It wasn't about her face," I said, and I realized as I said it that it was true. That's the strange part. I thought it would be. For 30 years, I thought the prize would be the look on their faces when they finally understood. But it wasn't the prize at all. The prize was sitting at the front of the room and realizing I didn't need the look. I never had. "I've been telling you that since we were lieutenants," she said. "I know. You were right. Don't be unbearable about it." She laughed, and we talked a while longer, two old soldiers at the end of a long campaign, and when I hung up the phone, the room was quiet, and the city glittered outside the window, and I sat for a long time in the dark, taking stock of a life spent at the edges of rooms and the single evening that had moved me, finally, to the center. In the weeks that followed, the partnership I had built did the thing I most wanted it to do, which was to keep working without me at the center of it. That is the real test of anything you build, whether it stands when you step back, and it stood. A short commendation found its way into my record. Official language describing in dry terms a thing that had been anything but dry to live through. And I read it once and felt the quiet satisfaction of seeing the institution's memory finally hold a shape of the truth. Not the applause, the record. The applause fades by morning. The record stays. A note arrived from Captain Mercer, handwritten, formal, and careful, thanking me in language that managed to be both correct and genuinely moved. He told me he thought about that night every day, not as a wound but as a compass, and that he had a newer aide working under him now, a young lieutenant fresh to the post, and that the first thing he had taught her was to never sort a guest by the door. He had paid the mercy forward already. I read the note twice and put it somewhere I would keep it. And Pamela called. Not often at first, but she called, and the calls were different than any we had ever had, because she asked questions, and then she listened to the answers. She asked what I actually did, within the limits of what I could say, and when I told her the boring true parts, the meetings and the documents, and the patient, unglamorous architecture of trust, she did not change the subject. She stayed. It was small. It was also, after 40 years, enormous. I found myself, in those weeks, turning a question over that I had never let myself ask. For my whole life, the question had been some version of, when will they finally see me? It was the engine under everything, the science fair and the commissioning and the funeral and the 30 years of money sent and miles flown. When will they see me? And the embassy night had answered it, loudly, in marble, in front of everyone. They had seen me at last. But the answer, I discovered, did not satisfy the question the way I had always assumed it would. Because once they finally saw me, I found that the seeing was not the thing I had actually been starving for. The new question, the truer one, the one I sat with in the quiet of those weeks, was this. Now that they can see you, do you still need them to? I held my sister's voicemail one evening, a small, ordinary message asking how my week had been, my thumb hovering over the button to call her back, and I felt the whole weight of the question in that small motion. I was not angry anymore. I was not hungry anymore. I could call her back or not, and either way I would be whole, and that, I understood, was something the kitchen door seat could never have taken from me, and the head table could never have given me. It had been mine the whole time. I had just been too busy waiting to be moved to the front of the room to notice I was already complete in the back of it. I pressed the button. I called my sister back. Not because I needed her to validate me, because I wanted to know how her week had been. There is a difference, and it had taken me 50 years and one long walk across a ballroom to learn it. There is a photograph from a small ceremony a few months after that evening, an ordinary military function in an ordinary room with bad lighting and a sheet cake. In it, I am wearing my uniform, the real one this time, the mess dress having finally been recovered from whatever airport had been holding it hostage, and the single silver star sits on my shoulder where it belongs. I am not doing anything dramatic in the photograph. I am just standing there, at ease, in the middle of the room, rather than the edge of it. And on my face is an expression I did not have in any photograph from the first 50 years of my life. I look like a woman who is not waiting for anything. That is the part I would want you to take if you take anything from a story about a captain and a kitchen door table and an ambassador who crossed a room. For most of my life, I believed that the cure for being underestimated was to finally be recognized. I believed that if I just worked hard enough and rose high enough, the people who had sorted me to the edges would one day be forced to see, and that the seeing would heal the thing inside me that had been broken on a school bus with a blue ribbon in my backpack. And I was wrong. Not because recognition never came. It came. An ambassador walked the length of a ballroom to deliver it. But recognition turned out to be a moment, not a medicine. It told the room a truth I already knew. It did not, could not, give me the thing I had actually been missing, which was the willingness to know my own worth without a witness. I think about that young captain often. I think about the fact that I almost spent that night the way the world expected me to, by handing him the same sentence I had been serving for 30 years, and how the better thing, The only thing I am actually proud of from that evening was choosing not to. The reveal was not the triumph. Anyone can enjoy a reveal. The triumph was what I did with the power the reveal handed me, which was to refuse to use it the way it had always been used on me. And I think about my sister, who is becoming, slowly and imperfectly and for real, someone I might one day call a friend. We are not fixed. 40 years do not vanish. But we are trying, as equals, on stone benches with nobody watching. And that is more than I ever expected to have. So here is what I know now, at the far end of all of it. They will sort you sometimes. They will glance at your gown and your quiet and the ordinary way you walk into a room, and they will wave you toward the table by the door, and your own family may smirk while they do it. When that happens, sit down with grace and do your work and be kind to the junior people they have seated you beside because they are watching how you carry it. The right people, the ones who actually know what you are, will always cross the room. That has been true every time it mattered in my life. But hear the last part, because it is the part that took me longest and matters most. If they never cross the room, if the ambassador never comes, if the recognition you have earned somehow never arrives, you will find, when you finally stop waiting for it, that you were already whole. The best seat in the room was never the head table. It was the one I learned to sit in without apologizing for taking up space. I found mine at 50 by a pair of swinging kitchen doors, in a borrowed navy gown, the night I stopped agreeing to be small. I hope it does not take you as long. And I hope, when your moment comes, that you are standing up when the truth walks in. If you've ever sat at the table by the door while someone who barely knew you decided you didn't matter, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Did the right person ever cross the room for you? And if you'd been in my shoes that night, would you have protected that young captain or let the reprimand stand? Tell me, because I read everyone. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and the bell, and thank you for being here with me.